I will do everything in my power to protect our LGBTQ citizens from the violence and oppression of a hateful foreign ideology. Believe me. And I have to say, as a Republican, it is so nice to hear you cheering for what I just said. Thank you.
If you had tried to convince me in 2016 or even 2020 that gays and blacks were voting for Trump, I never would have believed you.
A radical Islamic terrorist targeted the nightclub, not only because he wanted to kill Americans, but in order to execute gay and lesbian citizens because of their sexual orientation. It's a strike at the heart and soul of who we are as a nation.
Back then, I was listening to left-wing media, not even aware of the fact that there was such a thing.
So if Caitlyn Jenner were to walk into Trump Tower and want to use the bathroom, you would be fine with her using any bathroom she chooses?
That is correct.
What I know now may be shocking to some of you, but guess what? LGBT people and many other minority groups are turning their backs on Democrats, and we're going to talk about why. This is Voices with Vicky. I'm just an ordinary lesbian seeking extraordinary conversation. I've become increasingly aware that more and more gay people and other minorities are switching gears on their politics. And I really believe that the Democrats are in big trouble this time because of that fact. Not to mention the wars overseas, sending billions of dollars their way, our crippling economy here in the States. And it's the worst that we've seen, at least in my lifetime. How low does everyone's bank accounts have to go before we all wake up?
But what am I going to use for money? How am I going to pay for it?
What is it going to take? I'm really not sure anymore, because there are still people that aren't convinced. I've always considered myself a moderate Democrat, but by today's standards and the standards of the far left, I'm now a conservative. What? A lot of people have thrown in my face the issue of abortion. And while I don't entirely agree with how all of that was handled, it is up to the states, at least for now. But the real question is, why didn't the Democrats do anything about it when they had the chance? Why didn't they use the last 4 years to do something about that like they promised? And they're still making those same promises. It really feels like they're just holding our votes hostage through empty promises, fear tactics, like Project 2025.
So there's a very real possibility that I'm going to have to flee the country with my partner. And a lot of you might think that we're overreacting, but this is serious. It's because of Project 2025.
On the right, severe right, came up with this Project 25, and I don't even know. I mean, some of them I know who they are, but they're very, very conservative. He's involved in Project, and then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it.
They wrote a document that many of the points are fine. Many of the points are absolutely ridiculous. I have nothing to do with the document. I've never seen the document. I've seen certain things that are said in it.
Project 2025 is a proposal for how the next president should navigate the administrative state when they come into office. It has 4 pillars: a set of policy proposals for the next administration, a database of personnel who could serve in that next administration, a presidential administration academy designed to train that personnel, and a playbook of actions that the next president should take in their first 180 days in office. While many of the architects of Project 2025 served in the Trump administration, it is not a Trump-approved document or a part of his campaign. In fact, it's more accurate to say that Project 2025 is a proposal that a group of conservative activists are hoping to sell Trump on. It's an aspirational plan they want him to adopt if he wins a second term.
I'm kind of a big deal.
On the campaign trail, Trump has been talking about what he plans to do if elected in November, and that includes rolling back the rights of millions of LGBTQ people. It's part of a wider playbook to undo many modern civil rights advances for minority groups. White House correspondent Laura Barone Lopez has been following this, and she joins us now. Hi.
Hi.
So on LGBTQ rights, what has Trump said he wants to do?
Since launching his campaign, former President Donald Trump has targeted LGBTQ people, transgender people. He's attacked gender-affirming care for minors, as well as their ability to play in sports.
Hold on. The issue with kids being trans has actually become a serious problem, with the list of detransitioners growing longer and longer, which has actually divided the LGBT community at large. More on that in another video, though. And as far as sports, check out my friend Jessica Gill, who's a professional athlete and trans herself, who is fighting to keep women's sports for women. These issues are not black and white, and many of them at the core aren't really about discrimination at all, even though the headlines and news stories are always trying to convince you of that. It's about keeping kids safe from irreversible decisions, and in the case of sports, keeping them fair and for women and girls only. But mainstream isn't going to tell you that.
He says that he plans quick action if elected.
On day one, I will sign a new executive order to cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, transgender insanity, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content onto our children.
That promise you just heard, William, has become a staple of former President Donald Trump's campaign rallies.
How much of that, though, is just campaign rally rhetoric? I mean, we know that that kind of language excites a certain slice of his base. How much of that is just him talking versus what he actually plans to do?
Well, it's not just campaign rhetoric, and his allies have drafted a sweeping document titled Project 2025. It's led by the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and it details a blueprint for a second term for Trump, specifically on restricting LGBTQ rights. What that details is reinstating a transgender military ban, limiting LGBTQ workplace discrimination protections. Currently under the law, sexual orientation and gender identity are protected. It would rescind.
That is the Heritage Foundation's wish list and agenda, not Trump's agenda. And now I am not saying the man's perfect, and I am not saying that I love everything about him. I'm just simply pointing out that he has said nice things about gay people. And he also, if you notice, when they're talking about the rollback of LGBTQ rights, they're not really talking about gay people. They're talking specifically about gender ideology, teaching gender ideology in schools, and gender-affirming care for minors, and whether or not it's appropriate or safe. Those issues have nothing to do with gay people. It's just the sheer fact that LGB and then the TQIA+ is attached to it. What they're doing is going after the fact that doing this stuff for minors is probably a really bad idea. We've found out a lot about puberty blockers, a lot about some of these other issues happening with kids and the confusion and the hysteria that it's creating in the schools, and it's not very helpful to them. A lot of kids, even if they have dysphoria, end up growing out of it later on. More and more and more studies are coming out suggesting that you should not be transing your kid, and that a lot of it is a social contagion. It's all over the internet. It's all over TikTok. And, you know, kids are really vulnerable, and it's really hard to grow up, and it's hard to go through puberty. And just because you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean that you're trans. You very well might just be gay, or you just might be going through a phase. And that's perfectly fine. Hey, cut your hair, wear whatever clothes you want. I've always been a very, kind of a tomboy and whatever. I think that's perfectly fine, socially, but it's been taken too far, and they've introduced the medicalization of children. And that stuff is not reversible. Pumping yourself with hormones or using puberty blockers is not reversible. They are lying to all of us about it.
My name is Chloe Cole, and I'm a detransitioner. Another way to put that would be, I used to believe that I was born in the wrong body, and the adults in my life whom I trusted affirmed my belief, and this caused me lifelong, irreversible harm. I speak to you today as a victim of one of the biggest medical scandals in the history of the United States of America. I speak to you in the hope that you will have the courage to bring the scandal to an end and ensure that other vulnerable teenagers, children, and young adults don't go through what I went through. At the age of 12, I began to experience what my medical team would later diagnose as gender dysphoria. I was well into an early puberty, and I was very uncomfortable with the changes that were happening to my body. I was intimidated by male attention, and when I told my parents that I felt like a boy, in retrospect, all I meant was that I hated puberty, that I wanted this newfound sexual attention to go away, that I looked up to my brothers a little bit more than I did to my sisters. I came out as transgender in a letter I sent on the dining room table. My parents were immediately concerned. They felt like they needed to get outside help from medical professionals, but this proved to be a mistake. It immediately set our entire family down a path of ideologically motivated deceit and coercion. The gender specialist I was taken to see told my parents that I needed to be put on puberty blocking drugs right away. They asked my parents a simple question: would you rather have a dead daughter or a living transgender son? The choice was enough for my parents to let their guard down, and in retrospect, I can't blame them. This is the moment that we all became victims of so-called gender-affirming care. I was fast-tracked onto puberty blockers and then testosterone. The resulting menopausal-like hot flashes made focusing on school impossible. I still get joint pains and weird pops in my back, but they were far worse when I was on the blockers. A month later, when I was 13, I had my first testosterone injection. It's caused permanent changes to my body. My voice will forever be deeper, my jawline sharper, my nose longer, my bone structure permanently masculinized, my Adam's apple more prominent, my fertility unknown. I look in the mirror sometimes and I feel like a monster. I had a double mastectomy at 15. They tested my amputated breast for cancer. And I was cancer-free, of course. I was perfectly healthy. There was nothing wrong with my still developing body or my breasts, other than that, as an insecure teenage girl, I felt awkward about it. After my breasts were taken away from me, the tissue was incinerated. Before I was able to legally drive, I had a huge part of my future womanhood taken from me. I will never be able to breastfeed. I struggle to look at myself in the mirror at times. I still struggle to this day with sexual dysfunction. And I have massive scars across my chest. And the skin grafts that they took of my nipples are weeping fluid today. And they were grafted into a more masculine positioning, they said. After surgery, my grades in school plummeted. Everything that I went through did nothing to address my underlying mental health issues that I had. And my doctors, with their theories on gender, thought that all my problems would go away as soon as I was surgically transformed into something that vaguely resembled a boy. Their theories were wrong. The drugs and surgeries changed my body, but they did not and could not change the basic reality that I am and forever will be a female. When my specialist first told my parents that they could have a dead daughter or a live transgender son, I wasn't suicidal. I was a happy child who struggled because she was different. However, at 16, after my surgery, I did become suicidal. I'm doing better now, but my parents almost got the dead daughter promised to them by my doctors. My doctors had almost created the very nightmare they said they were trying to avoid. So what message do I want to bring to American teenagers and their families? I didn't need to be lied to. I needed compassion. I needed to be loved. I needed to be given therapy to help me work through my issues, not affirm to my delusion that by transforming into a boy, it would solve all my problems.
And more people are coming out and sharing their stories. There's a lot of detransitioners coming out in droves talking about this stuff. So it is an actual issue in the LGBT community, and he's calling it out. And it's good that he's calling that out. He's not discriminating against all gays and all trans and all everything. He's calling out the specific issues that are problematic in the United States, and he wants to do something about it. And this is how I ended up where I am, was because of the trans issues in the first place. It opened a huge door for me to see that there's a lot going on behind the curtain. And it's really, really scary because it makes the LGBT community look awful. There should be a separation and there should be a boundary and there should be a certain amount of gatekeeping that is done. Because if you just leave that door wide open and you let anybody pass through it, you're letting people get access to that care that likely don't need it. I feel like when it comes to having these discussions with some people on the left, they just counter me with, what about Trump? What about Trump? What about Trump? What about Trump? And yeah, what about Trump? Sure. But at the same time, we also have to remember that not everything we've heard about him is true. I still don't really know what I'm going to do come election day, but I do have to tell you that this has been very eye-opening to see just the tactics and the level that the left side and the Democrats will go to try to convince you that you're in danger, that all your rights are getting taken away from you, that it's this impending doom. You know, I'm open to different viewpoints, and I do like to highlight the fact that I did think very differently not all that long ago. So people do change, and it really has a lot to do with what you're exposed to and the people that you talk to and the way you come to thoughtful conclusions. Let's keep looking at everything with a critical eye, and I don't care if it's Trump, I don't care if it's Harris, I don't care who it is. We need to keep doing that, and I don't see people doing that enough.